The moment Judge Rollins burst into uncontrollable laughter marked the instant. Joan Pendleton's carefully constructed crusade collapsed under its own absurdity. What began as a dramatic attempt to convince the court that Gregory Beck's house was a monstrous destroyer of sunsets turned into an unintentional comedy show the second her attorney unveiled a foam board display decorated with Lego trees, plastic figurines, and a full Barbie dream. The courtroom froze, then slowly tilted toward disbelief, as Gerald, drenched in nervous sweat, tried to argue with a straight face that the miniature toy setup represented a two-scale visual obstruction. Judge Rollins, an 82-year-old with a trout-shaped gavel and a famously dry sense of humor, leaned forward, blinking twice as if confirming he was actually awake for this. When he finally asked whether the HOA regularly submits Mattel-based evidence, the room cracked not from outrage, but from laughter he could no longer restrain. What made it truly unforgettable wasn't just the ridiculousness of the display, but the way Joan's self-righteous empire began crumbling in real time. Her face tightened, her wide-brimmed hat trembling as she whispered urgent, frantic instructions to her attorney, who looked as though he wished he could crawl directly under the counsel table. Meanwhile, the defense attorney calmly dismantled her claims point by point, revealing the harsh truth: Gregory's home wasn't in the HOA. Their rules held no power over him, and, most devastating of all, Joan's own house caused more view obstruction than his ever did. That revelation broke whatever composure the judge had left. His laughter echoed off the walls, wiping away the tension Joan had tried for months to build. By the time he ruled the case, a frivolous display of aesthetic authoritarianism, the courtroom knew it wasn't just a legal defeat, it was the definitive end of Joan Pendleton's reign of sunset supremacy. Her threats, her petitions, her Flamengo-based intimidation tactics, all of it dissolved the moment the judge's laughter transformed her once fearsome campaign into a spectacle of pure, undeniable ridiculousness. The HOA's case began to unravel the very moment Gerald, Joan Pendleton's visibly exhausted attorney, wheeled out a foam board display that looked more like a child's school project than a piece of legal evidence. On it stood carefully arranged Lego trees, plastic shrubs, and a bright pink Barbie dream house meant to represent the egregious obstruction allegedly caused by Gregory Beck's home. The courtroom stared in stunned silence as Gerald cleared his throat and tried to deliver his argument with dignity, his voice trembling while he pointed at the miniature pink balcony as if it were Exhibit A in a federal crime. It wasn't just the absurdity of the props, it was the confidence with which he presented them. As though no one else would dare notice, he had strolled into court armed with toys instead of facts. Judge Rollins, who had presided over countless strange disputes across decades, seemed genuinely baffled. He squinted at the model, tilted his head, and finally asked whether the HOA regularly submits metal-based evidence. That single question set the tone for what followed: a slow, spectacular implosion of Joan's entire crusade. With every passing second, the foam board display became less of a visual aid and more of a punchline. Even Joan, sitting upright in her massive wide-brimmed hat, looked mortified as her grand argument: months of petitions, vigils, sunset, surveillance, committees, and self-declared aesthetic dominion was reduced to a flimsy toy diorama. When the defense attorney rose to speak, she didn't even need theatrics. She dismantled the claim with calm precision, exposing the truth that Gregory's property wasn't in the HOA, and the bylaws held no authority over him. And then came the final blow. A veteran surveyor testified that Joan's own house was actually taller from several angles. The Barbie Dreamhouse prop, which had been meant to dramatize Gregory's supposed obstruction, now stood as an unintentional symbol of the HOA's contradictions and overreach. By the time the judge burst into full laughter and dismissed the lawsuit, the miniature display had achieved something incredible. It didn't just fail to support the HOA's case, it utterly destroyed it, revealing the entire legal attack as nothing more than a toy-sized tantrum. The quiet neighborhood of Sycamore Bluffs had weathered petty disputes before, but nothing prepared its residents for the spectacular unraveling of harmony triggered by Joan Pendleton's obsession with preserving her sunset view. What began as a personal annoyance over Gregory Beck's newly built home structure, perfectly legal and technically outside the HOA, quickly spiraled into a neighborhood-wide conflict fueled by Joan's ego, theatrics, and boundless determination to maintain her self-appointed throne. She had always acted as the neighborhood's unofficial monarch, ruling with pastel gardening gloves and Chardonnay confidence, but this time her crusade crossed a line that even her loyal wine-walk entourage struggled to justify. Joan didn't simply complain. She mobilized. She distributed ominous flyers branding Gregory a Skyline Saboteur, launched petitions filled with dramatic pleas for view preservation, and staged candlelit vigils where she recited emotional poetry about dying horizons. She even deployed a sunset recon committee armed with binoculars and lawn chairs, treating the shifting shadows of Gregory's house as though they were signs of approaching disaster. Her campaign spread through social media, HOA meetings, and neighborhood gossip circles, turning what should have been a simple disagreement into a public spectacle. The once friendly community found itself split, those who humored Joan's theatrics and those who realized she had drifted into full-blown obsession. As her crusade intensified, so did the frustration of neighbors who were tired of being dragged into her manufactured drama. Joan's relentless postings, petitions, accusations, and escalating antics created a tension that rippled through morning coffee gatherings, evening walks, and routine interactions. By the time she filed an actual lawsuit against Gregory, claiming psychological distress and even vitamin D disruption, the neighborhood's patience had worn thin. Many quietly rooted for the absurdity to end. And when the court exposed the truth that her own house blocked more views than Gregory's ever did, the collective shift was immediate. Joan's aura of authority cracked. The woman who once dictated the color of mailboxes and the height of lawn ornaments now stood, revealed as the source of the very chaos she claimed to fight. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood's loyalty evaporated. Neighbors who once bowed to her whims began openly rolling their eyes at her demands. Some laughed about the lawsuit, others avoided her altogether. The final blow came when she was voted off the HOA board in near-unanimous fashion. Her reign ending not with dramatic flair, but with quiet collective rejection. The sunset war she started didn't defend her view, it destroyed her influence, exposing that the real problem wasn't a house blocking the horizon, but a self-appointed queen ruling a kingdom that no longer believed in her crown. The turning point in Joan Pendleton's crusade arrived not with a dramatic speech or another one of her overblown petitions, but with a simple set of measurements that exposed the irony at the core of her entire campaign. For months she had waged a ceaseless war against Gregory Beck's newly built home, insisting it robbed her of her sacred sunset view. She had rallied neighbors, staged vigils, hired a so-called light consultant, and ultimately dragged the matter into court, framing herself as the tragic victim of a looming architectural villain. But when the defense's expert surveyor, Tom Martinez, calmly took the stand, Joan's narrative cracked open like brittle glass. Tom's testimony was quiet, factual, and devastating. Using official land surveys, elevation charts, and years of experience, he explained that Gregory's house wasn't the monster Joan claimed it to be. In reality, her own home stood 6 feet taller than his. She had simply built on lower terrain, creating the illusion that Gregory's place towered over hers. From several angles within the neighborhood, especially from homes on the north side, Joan's house wasn't just slightly obstructive, it was the single largest view blocker in Sycamore Bluffs. The courtroom murmured as diagrams were displayed, each one making the truth harder for Joan to deny. Her dramatic accusations, her handmade flyers, her sunset surveillance squad, all of it collapsed under the weight of objective measurements. Judge Rollins, who had been holding back amusement for most of the hearing, couldn't maintain his composure once the evidence was laid out. The absurdity of the situation finally became undeniable. The woman who had spent months accusing her neighbor of stealing her sunsets had been blocking other people's views for years without a second thought. Joan's face shifted through disbelief, outrage, and a strained attempt to maintain dignity. But the damage was irreversible. Her authority, once unquestioned thanks to her bold personality and relentless meddling, evaporated in the span of a few diagrams. Neighbors who had watched the drama unfold suddenly understood the truth behind the conflict. Joan's outrage had never been about preserving beauty or protecting the community. It had been about control. And now the whole community saw that her crusade was grounded not in principle, but hypocrisy. When the judge dismissed the lawsuit, her influence crumbled alongside it. The revelation that her own house was the biggest view blocker of all didn't just defeat her case. It stripped away the illusion she had built around herself, leaving only the undeniable irony that she had been fighting a war against a problem of her own making. The downfall of Joan Pendleton's self-appointed rule over Sycamore Bluffs didn't end in a courtroom, a board meeting, or some grand confrontation. It ended at a backyard barbecue that was equal parts celebration, satire, and community-wide liberation. Gregory Beck, freshly victorious after the judge shredded Joan's lawsuit and ordered her to pay his legal fees, decided to host what he jokingly called barbecue and blocked views. Word spread quickly, and by the evening of the event, nearly the entire neighborhood had gathered on his lawn, eager not just for food but for closure after months of pointless chaos, fueled by Joan's obsession with sunsets and control. Gregory set the tone with humor. He placed reclining chairs throughout his yard, all angled dramatically as if guests were there to observe the so-called shadow crisis Joan had spent months complaining about. Cardboard cutouts of Joan's oversized colonial home stood at different angles, each labeled with playful signs like actual view blocker and warning, "This house causes sunset panic." Neighbors laughed as they posed for photos beside the cutouts, enjoying for the first time the freedom to acknowledge the absurdity openly. Gregory handed out commemorative t-shirts reading, "I survived the sunset lawsuit," complete with a cartoon sun being blocked by a Hosa detail that sent guests into fits of laughter every time they noticed a new attendee wearing one. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, Gregory live-streamed the sunset from a top-tier camera setup, complete with soft jazz and a running caption that read, "Unobstructed," for educational purposes. Neighbors gathered around, some watching the glowing sky, others watching Joan's furious silhouette pacing behind her windows. The live stream went mildly viral online, attracting thousands of viewers who chimed in with their own HOA horror stories. In the yard, the mood was lighter than it had been in months. People mingled, joked, and bonded over the shared relief of finally being free from Joan's relentless demands and disruptions. What truly cemented the end of her reign, however, was the unity that formed among the neighbors that night. Longtime residents who had once tolerated Joan's overbearing behavior found themselves laughing with new friends, swapping stories, and realizing the neighborhood functioned better without fear of her criticism. By the time the grill burned low and the last guests lingered with plates of dessert, a quiet but powerful shift had taken place. The community had reclaimed itself not by confrontation, but by gathering together and refusing to bow to the authority she had clung to for so long. 3 months later, when the vote came to remove Joan from the HOA board, it wasn't a surprise but an inevitability. The barbecue had done what no petition or argument could. It united the neighborhood, deflated her authority, and turned her once intimidating presence into a shared joke. The dictatorship that had ruled with wide-brimmed hats, flamingo-lined pathways, and endless demands didn't fall in a courtroom. It fell on a warm evening with laughter, grilled food, and a sunset everyone could enjoy without fear.